For most of us, the birth of a child is private and trembling with hope. In Sparta, the birth is public and trembling with judgment. Forget the heroic statues and battlefield poems. Behind the legend, there is a cold, methodical apparatus that treats bodies as raw material for the state. Today, we will reveal the mechanisms, the rules, and the human cost of a system that turns children into weapons and love into obligation. Picture a newborn laid on a stone slab, a thin flame guttering, the smell of oil and ash, the hush of elders who never laugh and who hold a ruler and a list. This image is not myth. It is the entry point into a politics of reproduction that claims survival as its excuse and eugenia as its method. We will follow a single midwife, a council, a training ground, and secret missions to understand how ritual, law, and everyday life combine to make a society that both conquers and collapses. The state codifies every intimate act. Laws dictate who marries whom, which unions are permitted, and what counts as a defective body. Magistrates in the council publish edicts that read like medical manuals and military directives at once. A written ordinance instructs inspectors to examine curvature of limbs, strength of cry, and the color of the eyes and skin, and to mark the child as fit or not. The word eunomia appears in records as a praise of order and as a justification for choices that silence mothers. Official testimony from a chronicler describes councils where old men compare measurements and vote. The implication is clear. This is not family law. This is state-run biology. Public rituals bless the decision with ceremony, while private consequences are irreversible. Those sanctioned as weak face exile or worse, while those declared useful are celebrated as potential legacy of the city. The social cost is enormous because discipline is not only military. It becomes domestic law, medicine, and morality. What the state names discipline, many call cruelty. At home, the machinery takes root in the smallest rooms. Mothers learn to measure their infant at the hearth. Husbands are chosen in public lists by weight and stature. Children are taught to value the polis over the household, and tenderness is reinterpreted as treachery. A neighbor, a teacher, a priest can report a sign of softness and set in motion an inspection. The daily routines include drills at dawn and silent meals by candle, where emotional warmth is withheld as training. The agoge, the formal training system, begins with rules imported into nursery life. Rituals for feeding, deliberate deprivation, calculated exposure to cold and hunger all teach a body to endure. Micro-stories thread through this everyday net. A woman named Thera hides a milk cloth in her skirt for a baby she fears the council will mark. A baker called Pericles watches as a boy he once fed is taken for training. A teacher named Lysias whispers a poem and then spits it out when a superior arrives. These are the domestic translations of law into habit. In the delivery hall, the inspection is technical and ritual at once. The midwife Thera lays a newborn on a cold slab. An ephor named Xanthos steps forward with a strip of leather and a ledger. Elders speak in clipped phrases and write with charcoal on wax. The scene is sensory and brief, but its weight is enormous. 5 senses form the judgment. The smell of burned oil, the taste of salt from the midwife's sweat, the sight of the child's small hands, the sound of a fragile cry, the feel of a ring of muscle under fingertip. Thera says please. Xanthos says report. An old magistrate named Callias traces a curvature. Another elder named Myron closes his eyes and nods. The ledger takes a mark. The word unfit carries a silence that tastes of iron. That silence moves across the room, and a father called Dorian drops his hand from the child's ankle as if struck. Dialogue stretches the moment and makes the ritual human. Thera pleads. Xanthos repeats policy. Callias pronounces criteria. Myron cautions mercy. Dorian asks what else can be done. Pericles murmurs that the law is the law. Lysias offers a line to remember. The exchange is eightfold, and each voice counts. The communal breath tightens. Inspections are not only assessment, they are a moral performance that instructs everyone present what matters and who must be sacrificed. The agoge is the state made flesh. Boys are removed from homes and organized into hierarchies that teach endurance, cunning, and obedience. The training hall smells of sweat, leather, and bruised skin. The tutors speak in terse commands. The floor echoes with running feet, and the benches are rough under naked thighs. Hunger becomes a lesson. Stealing becomes a virtue if done for survival and punished if exposed. Pain is curricular. A trainer named Eubulos strikes a knuckle into a palm and laughs as a recruit named Nikitas learns to bite his pain into silence. Another instructor named Themistocles instructs with a slow monotone and markets fear as discipline. In this environment, rituals of superiority and humiliation are continuous. Pupils memorize spoken law, sing songs that praise hierarchy, and practice marches that erase individual rhythm. The sensory map is dense. Cold wind bites at exposed ribs. The taste of stale barley holds in the mouth. The sight of scarred backs is normal. The sound of a whip slices the quiet. And the touch of salt and ash on lips marks initiation. Dialogues during training are prolonged and raw. An exchange of 8 to 10 lines between a recruit, an instructor, and peers reveals how authority is internalized. A boy asks why the elder smiles at suffering. An elder answers that suffering proves usefulness. A peer laughs and then sobs. The exchange chains the body to the idea of sacrifice. Mind control is as deliberate as physical discipline. Silence becomes a right. Children learn to speak only when summoned and to keep secrets. The rites of initiation culminate in ceremonies where humiliation is sanctified. At the altar, men chant. A circle of elders brand name into memory, and a chosen youth receives lashings in the presence of the city as proof of his endurance. Sensory detail centers the scene. Leather squeals, a metallic clack punctuates the chant. The skin prickles under sun, a metallic taste rises in mouths, and crowds exhale in unison. The ceremony is a lesson in identity erasure and rebirth. Dialogues are present and ritualized. An elder commands, a recruit confesses fear. A priest intones a line about legacy, and an audience replies with a single word of approval. The rite is both legal and theological in its justification, invoking the notion of eunomia to sanctify what is violence. The final test rewrites individual history into a collective story. Hidden layers sustain the visible institution. There is a secret unit, an inner machine, tasked with clandestine operations that eliminate dissent and secure resources. This unit is recruited from the top graduates of Agoge and swears oaths that bind them to the council and to a doctrine of purity. They operate under a cover of ceremonial law, justified by the same rhetoric that defends public inspections. In one night operation, a squad approaches a farming hamlet under a moonless sky. The sensory record is precise. The air is damp and smells of river mud. The sound of a dog is swallowed by the night. Footprints press into soft earth. The metal of blades glints like a promise, and whispers sting like nettles. Dialogues in this scene are terse and numerous. A commander named Theron orders silence. A recruit named Callias answers with a vow. An elder handler named Timon recites a legal clause that makes murder into duty. The exchanges number 9, and they rotate between duty and doubt. The operation is legal within the codes because the council defines the enemy before the act. That legalized violence becomes a lever of control and a source of fear that polices the citizenry. But the machine has faults. The virtues that strengthen also produce brittleness. The obsession with certain body types shrinks genetic diversity and makes the population fragile to disease. The moral calculus that celebrates sacrifice jostles with bodies of living families and with the economy that needs labor and innovation. Corruption seeps in when successes are rewarded with wealth, and wealth opens back channels to corruption of the selection process itself. Military rigidity becomes tactical inflexibility when rivals change tactics. A decisive battle brings these weaknesses into the open. Armor is perfect, but imagination is absent. Leaders follow doctrine into an ambush that exposes the limits of a society that valued form over adaptability. The pivotal battle is sensory and narrative. Dust hangs like a veil. The copper stink of blood rises. Drum beats lose meaning. The taste of metal floods mouths, and the sight of ranks breaking
is unbearable. In 3 consecutive moments of high tension, a commander replays childhood training in his mind. A recruit remembers a mother who hid milk, and a messenger must decide whether to defy orders. Each moment carries internal conflict, memory, and a decision that shifts the course. The result is a collapse not only of army, but of belief. The protagonist of this investigation is Thera, the midwife. Her childhood is humble and shaped by loss. She grows up in a village on the margins, listening to stories of ancient heroes and to the quiet grief of mothers who bury children without public notice. Her formation as a healer begins under a woman named Gaia, who teaches herbs, songs, and the ethics of care. Thera learns measurement, how to read a pry, and when to warm a small limb. Her earliest trauma is a season of famine when she must watch a child die because the council prioritizes grain for soldiers. That loss hardens her work into conviction. As an adult, she refuses to stay invisible. She trains in formal obstetrics in the city and acquires a ledger of forbidden practices. She becomes a midwife who sometimes hides infants, who counts pulses, and who keeps a small list of names. In present time, she is a skilled practitioner, with steady hands, an acute ear, and a conscience that soon becomes dangerous. The backstory explains not only competence, but why she will become our guide and whistleblower. The antagonist is the council, centered around an ephor called Xanthos and an elder magistrate named Callias. Their origins are aristocratic and ritualized. Born to privilege, they inherit interpretations of law and an unbending sense of mission. Xanthos in youth studies strategy and the rhetoric of survival. He reads treatises that rationalize sacrifice and adopts the language of eugenia to justify extreme measures. Callias, older and more ceremonious, frames policy as an ethical project, invoking eunonia in public speeches. Together, they create a bureaucratic architecture that claims to save a fragile polity. Their formation includes a marriage to power and to myth. In practice, their fixation on order produces blindness. Corruption enters not as greed at first, but as moral certainty that licenses all means. Their backstory shows how ideology, not only malice, facilitates cruelty. Secondary characters appear throughout and react with distinct actions. Dorian, the father, drops a hand in the inspection and later leads a small protest in the market. Pericles, the baker, feeds boys and later hides a record in oven ashes. Lysias, the teacher, whispers forbidden poems and is punished. Nicetas, the recruit, chooses empathy in a training scene and later deserts. Eubulos, the trainer, enforces discipline and later questions his own methods. Theron, the commander, leads the night operation. Callias, the recruit, doubts orders. Timon, the handler, orchestrates secret missions. Myron, the elder, sometimes shows mercy and sometimes votes with the council. Each name performs an action that moves the narrative and reveals facets of the system. Moments of tension punctuate the arc and force choices. In the inspection room, Thera pleads for a newborn while the council weighs law and mercy.
Memory of famine flares in her mind, and she must decide whether to hide the child or to record the consequence. The scene compresses fear, hands, the metallic scent of ink, and the sound of a scratching stylus into a single, impossible decision. In the training grounds, a peer named Nikitas breaks under a beating and confesses a memory of a mother who sang his name. The confession forces others to empathize and to choose whether to report him. A midnight mission sees Callias hesitate as a farmer pleads for his life, and the unit must either execute legal orders or explode into mutiny. Each of these sequences explores conflict between code and conscience and lasts long enough to show the interiority of decisions. If this sounds extreme, you are not alone. Even readers steeped in history feel a shock at how intimate power can become. Now pause and tell us what you think. Can a society legitimately sacrifice intimate bonds for perceived security? Type security or humanity and add one sentence explaining why you chose that word. Your comment helps others see different angles and guides future investigations. It also keeps this conversation alive in public because history matters when it is debated. The decline accelerates after the battle. The city loses men and the demographic squeeze becomes crushing. Barns sit with fewer hands to gather crops. Those deemed valuable are prioritized for military roles and for privileges, leaving whole social functions understaffed. Corrupt patrons manipulate inspections to secure heirs with names and fortunes rather than fitness. Ideas of purity calcify into prejudice. Within months, trade routes shift. Young artisans leave to seek opportunity, and the cultural imagination narrows. Communities fragment. The legend of invincibility dissolves into a narrative of loss. Legacies become contested memory. Exiles tell stories abroad, and the story of the city becomes a warning. 1 month after the collapse, streets are quieter. Markets show fewer vendors and more patched cloaks. Dorian opens a small meeting to share names of those lost. Pericles counts bread sold and notes a slump. The elite host private feasts that now taste of ash. 3 months later, migration patterns reveal families leaving for coastal towns where labor is needed and where paternal pride is not judged by a council. The council loses authority as foreign traders bargain with local leaders. 6 months later, the city is a shadow of its former self. Ruins begin to accumulate alongside new uses of old rituals as spectacle for curious visitors. Histories and chronicles written by foreign observers record the process and call it a case of institutional hubris. Scholars later debate whether the cost was inevitable or manufactured. The epilogue is concrete. Registers show a drop in births by 20% in the first 6 months after the battle. A ledger hidden by Pericles surfaces with names that contradict official lists. A poet from a neighboring town publishes a satirical piece that becomes a popular song. Former soldiers turn to farming and to crafts. The council that once praised eunomia is reduced to a smaller assembly that now negotiates with merchant guilds. Memory itself fractures. Some cling to the old symbols and attempt restorations. Others dismantle rituals publicly and quietly in households where midwives like Thera teach different songs to newborns. The moral lesson is not hypothetical. When a state imposes a single value at the expense of diversity, tenderness, and adaptability, it risks creating the very fragility it sought to escape. At the end, the story of Sparta as machine and ruin reminds us that there is a cost to engineering people in the name of security. The search for perfection produces its opposite, a culture that cannot renew itself. If this account stirred you, subscribe to follow more investigations that connect past institutions to present dilemmas. Leave your word in the comments and share perspectives. Remember that history is not merely a catalog of oddities. It is a mirror. What we decide to honor today can become the scaffold of tomorrow.